What's up guys, Ben here bringing you another video today. I want to cover the Florida roster announcement. They officially unveiled their team last week. I want to talk a little bit about it, but I want to put a little bit of a spin on it. About a month ago, I did a tier list of CDL teams going into the next season based on the rumored rosters. Now that we've got some more concrete information on a couple of these teams outside of Paris, I want to go ahead and revisit that list, see if I stack up a little bit differently, and go from there. Let's dive in. All right guys, so here are the listed tiers we're going to work with. I've added one from the last time we did this now that we have, I think, more concrete information on a couple of these teams. I'm going to start off with your Sunday regulars. These are your top 4 teams that should be making it to Sundays pretty consistently. We've got potential contenders. These are your top 4 to top 8 teams that should qualify for champs, have an opportunity on a given weekend to go ahead and challenge for a major championship. But I think ultimately will be mostly a little bit of a step below some of the teams above them. Work to do. I think these are teams that have the pieces to be a top 8. But I think with a lot of these teams, and we'll dive in, it's mostly going to be about developing chemistry. And we have some kind of questions around some of these rosters that are being built. Missing pieces, I think these are teams that probably don't have enough talent to really contend with the teams above. That doesn't necessarily mean they're bad teams, but again, as we dive in, you'll see that I think these squads, maybe a roster change or two from being a legit contender, and incomplete, and honestly, just to save us all the trouble, bro, we're just gonna put Paris here because I don't really know what the roster is yet. There's a lot of rumors. It might have Clay, it might have Venom, it might have TJ, but I haven't heard anything concrete. So until I do and know what this squad of 4 is, we're going to go ahead and put them in incomplete. Let's start with the first team here, OpTic Texas. Obviously last season started out well, struggled towards the end, but obviously dealt with the Illy injury and all the stuff that came with that. Funky offseason for OpTic Texas. Shotzi was maybe leaving, and then he was there, and then maybe Dashy and Illy were leaving, and now they're not. So a little bit of like kind of instability around this team, right? Like what kind of chemistry is this roster going to have? I think on paper they have talent good enough to win. I think regardless of how Modern Warfare 2 plays and play styles and no slide cancel, this team's still going to have the talent to compete for championships. I think the biggest question with them is just sort of like, what is that chemistry like? If it's not good, are they going to make a roster change at some point this season? But I think we got to put them in Sunday regulars. I'd be very surprised if this team is not making a majority of top 4s at some of these tournaments. And I have a feeling if they aren't, they're going to make changes pretty quickly on this team and not wait like they did last year for Illy to come back. All right, the next team looking here at the bottom is the Florida Mutineers. And let's talk a little bit about their new roster. So the announcement came out yesterday, a new era of Mutiny, and their team is Major Maniac, Brack, Colt Havoc, and Vickle, as well as Dave Patty coming back as a substitute and Willett coaching this team. Look, I'll be honest, talent-wise, this team is not as good as some of the other squads we'll get to later in this video. But this is better than I think the direction Florida was initially going in this ROSTERMANIA. I really like that they're giving Brack a shot again. I mean, he's been grinding a lot since that first year of CDL when he was on the Toronto squad and didn't really get a look. Havoc's been back on Florida for like, it seems like the 3rd or 4th time now. So that's interesting. Good to see Vickle getting a shot in the CDL. He was on a Toronto Ultra Academy, Toronto, whatever, academy team last year and was playing pretty good second fiddle to a bunch of the players on that team. But I think it's sort of a gap filler in this team. Should be interesting to see how he does. And look, Major Maniac, I mean, he's an S&D go. You know, respawn's definitely a question mark with Mike, pace as well. But Mike is a solid AR option. I just think, again, with this Florida team, like they're not going to have the talent to compete with some of the other squads. So I see their win conditions being very much let's grind out series. Let's be an elite top 4 S&D squad. Let's figure out how to get a couple of really winner hardpoint or control maps, assuming obviously control is a 3rd game mode, and sort of go from there and see if we can overperform sort of the baseline of this team. All that said, for Florida, as much as I like to put them in sort of the work to do category, I really think that this team may not really last through the end of the season. Again, I like players like Mike. I like players like Havoc. They are solid in certain game modes, but I think with the way that the CDL plays now, where you really need players that are consistent across 2 of the 3 game modes, I'm very worried about this team when it comes to respawn. I'm going to put them in missing pieces. I think that there may be a roster change or 2 from being like a really good sort of top 6 team. And look, they may overperform this slot. I just think with a lot of teams getting better, and we'll get to those in a sec, I just think that they're going to be kind of sitting right now for that 10th or 11th spot in terms of overall squads in CDL. All right, the Minnesota RØKKR. This was a team that splashed a little bit of funds, and I say a little, which means a lot of funds this offseason. Completely new roster. The only person really coming back is Dylan Attach. They brought on Bant. They brought on Cammy, both from the Toronto Ultra organization, as well as Afro from London. So they're pairing Dylan with 3 EU GOATs, going a little bit of a different direction. And for Minnesota, I mean, you basically hit the number on sort of getting the top tier free agents on your roster. Look, Minnesota hasn't had the best of time the last 3 years. It's been really inconsistent. And yes, I do know they do have that event win in the Cold War season, but outside of that weekend, results have not been particularly good. And so they're really giving it a go with this roster. I think this team definitely has the potential to be a top 4 squad and hopefully address Minnesota's sort of issues they've had the last few seasons where respawn has been a real problem spot. And I think with the way that the Modern Warfare 2 beta plays, which is a little bit slower, you don't have the slide cancel as effective anymore, and sort of how slow sometimes these games play in the beginning, and if we have this potential first event coming up as rumored in the middle of December, I like sort of how the deck is stacked for this Minnesota team. I think Afro may be the player that has to adjust the most potentially to this lineup, but I think if he's coming in hungry and willing to learn, I think this Minnesota team could be a top 4 team early. I will say though, since we haven't seen them play, I gotta put them in potential contenders. They may be sort of at the top of this category, but for me personally, I think they should be in Sunday regulars. I think it's unfair to a lot of other teams for me to put them in the top tier category because we haven't seen this squad of 4 play, but they are a squad to watch, I think, going into the beginning of the season and potentially one of your like top 3 or top 4 teams for most of the year. All right, we got the New York Subliners. So a lot of sort of back and forth about the squad. It looks like this roster is going to be Skies, Priesta, Kismet, and Hydra. So New York able to keep Hydra, bring in his Valorant duo Skies. Kiz is also staying on the squad with Paul X heading off to London, and we'll get to him later. And they bring in Priesta from Minnesota. And I know like a lot of fans are like, why Preston? And I've talked about this a bit on my stream. I think Preston very much is sort of the gap filler on this team, but I don't think that he's going to have some super long leash. I've heard that Wardy may be heading to this team as a substitute. So some really good pieces. My areas of concern with this team are kind of in 2 spots. One is right now it looks like their coaching staff is D-Real and Sender. I don't mind that squad, but if you look at some of the other teams in the league, I think their coaching staffs are a little bit better. I'm a little concerned that considering the culture problems that New York has had in the past, that this coaching staff seems a little passive to me. I might be wrong maybe, and I'm sure those coaches may not agree with that characterization, but from what I've heard around the team and people that have worked with those players, it's not going to be 2 coaches that I think are really going to hit the goal of establishing a new culture on this team. So I'm a little worried on that aspect. I think the second thing too is we have a lot of new players on this team. There's a lot of talent on this team, but I don't see a lot of real dirty work players on this team. I think those guys could be a massive X factor, same with Preston. So there's upside this New York team, but I think some squads might be a little better than them to start. And I think this New York team might take some time to gel. So all that considered, I'm putting them in work to do, but this could be a surprise team that plays well at the first event if they sort of click early. But I think it may be a little bit of up and down before they sort of get going. I like their potential opportunity to qualify for champs, but there's some squads I think are better suited to the beginning of the game. All right, next up, we got the Boston Breach, and they made a big upgrade over the offseason. So they sent TJ to the free agency line, and they bring in Big Wake Awakening from Florida. There were a lot of rumors that maybe Clayster was going to come to this team for methods. They ended up sticking with Zen, which was great choice. I think Zen definitely deserves to keep his spot and keep challenging for staying on the team. I think for Boston, it really comes down to this. I think it was an impressive result for them last season, being the last team to form and qualifying for champs. You're keeping the sub duo together. I think there are maybe potentially other teams that are a little bit better at that position than them, but getting quality sub players is really difficult. So I think keeping the team together was probably the smartest move for Boston. Talent-wise, look, I think teams like FaZe and OpTic and maybe Thieves have a little bit more about them, but I like the potential look for this Boston team. My concern for this Boston team a little bit is search and destroy. They really struggled at it at the end of the season. I don't know if bringing in Big Wake is really going to improve that, but beginning of the game, you never know. Sometimes teams can get ahead in this game mode early. I think for me, I'm going to put this Boston team probably in work to do. I think they have the potential to be like a top 4, top 6 team. I think that's really their ceiling though still. I just think talent-wise, this Boston team doesn't have as much talent as some of the other teams. And look, maybe they come out one weekend, it all clicks and they're able to grab a chip. But in terms of a Call of Duty champion, I think this team is probably still a move or 2 away from being that. But I think they made the right moves in the offseason. They got to give this team some more time to sort of keep developing. I like their upside. I just think some teams have a little bit more skill. All right, the London Royal Ravens. So this squad is very interesting. It looks like they are starting off this season, based on what I've heard, with Paul X coming over from New York, Asim coming over from Los Angeles Guerrillas, and they are keeping Nasty and they're keeping Zero from last year's squad. So this is another team that last year I thought was kind of performed sort of in an interesting fashion. They were sort of up and down, and once they got kind of the best version of their team with Gizmo, they were playing really well online. They were really struggling struggling though when they got to land in terms of being consistent. I think sometimes they were getting stuck in the moment. So bringing in Asim and bringing in Paul, I think brings in a little bit more presence on players that have been there. I would say Asim more than Paul, because I think sometimes Paul is definitely a little bit more in the emotional swing. But I like this sort of maybe upgrade in talent with this roster. If they can get Nasty to be sort of the X factor on land, this team could actually be very good. Again, same thing as Boston though. I think some teams have better talent than they do. So I'm going to go ahead and slot them in work to do. But there's another team I can see definitely qualifying for champs. I just don't think that they have the talent to really be in the next tier above. But again, you never know. All right, we got Atlanta FaZe. They made one change over the offseason after losing to LA Thieves in the COD Champs Finals. They sent Alec, aka RSTs, off to Los Angeles Guerrillas, and they brought in Slasher from the same organization. I think Austin, the biggest thing with bringing Austin for them, I think it improves in two spots. One is, I think Austin, aka Slasher, is definitely a better S&D player than Alec is historically in his career. I think the second thing, too, with bringing in Austin is that you're bringing him in to be the fourth best player in this team, and I don't think a major pressure situation. So you might be actually be getting a little bit even of a better version of Slasher than we've seen the last couple of years. So look, again for FaZe, and I'm not tiering these tiers in any specific order, so when you see it, just know that. I think they're Sunday regulars. They made it to a bunch of finals last year, didn't win them. Expect them to probably win an event or two this year. And if I had to pick a team to make it the COD Champs Grand Finals, it's probably them, considering they've been there the last 3 years. All right, next up, we got the Toronto Ultra. This team, a little bit of a new look this season. You've got Scrappy, you've got Standy, and they are joining Kleenex and Insight, who are already on the squad. So Cammy and Vance off, Marky B gone. New look for this Toronto lineup, and this team has gotten a lot faster with the additions of Scrappy and Standy. They're going to be an aggressive, speedy squad. I really like sort of the mindset this team's going to have. To pair some faster players, I think, with Toby. My concern for Toronto is twofold. One is they need to improve in hardpoint, which it seems that they're addressing with the personnel on this team, which is good. The second thing, though, is Mark leaving opens up a giant question mark on who's going to coach the team. And my concern is you're bringing in players like Standy and Scrappy, who are expressive players, and you need some assistance from the management side to make sure that the culture you want is being set in that locker room. So all of that considered, I really like Toronto's upside in S&D. We don't know what the third game mode is yet. This team might be a slow starter, so I caution, but I'm a little bullish on Toronto. I got them as potential contenders, but I won't be surprised if this team struggles actually at the first event, honestly, getting used to the new game. But there's a lot of really like low-key skill on this team, and if they can get a better version of Standy on the squad, and I have a feeling Scrappy is going to win Rookie of the Year, this team could be very good, and we'll get another solid year from Insight and Kleenex. All right, next up, we got the Los Angeles Guerrillas. So they're running it back with Spar, Neptune, and Kyler, aka Hook, after their event win last year. Unfortunately, did not qualify for champs. And as discussed, they have swapped Slasher for Arcides. They have a new coaching staff, it seems like, this season, with Marky B coming over from Toronto. I've got some mixed feelings on this team. The skill level is there for them. The skill level is there for them to be good, and I expect this team to be a day one grinder. So in terms of being prepared for the first event, I have this team pretty high up on that list. My biggest question though is this roster gonna be the one that finishes the end of the season? Like, this team could be absolute top 3 contender, Kyler and Neptune doing crazy stuff on the map, or they could be 9th or 10th best team, getting on every day, making mistakes, making boneheaded plays, and you're just like, I don't know how to read this team. So it's super, super hard. I'm hoping that Alec can come in and sort of set a culture, but it might be really difficult because anyone that's really kind of played with these players in the last 2 years has kind of complained, especially with Neptune and Hook, that there's sort of a level of inconsistency. They see that there's a ceiling there. They get on some days and those guys fry, but there's decision-making issues. So this team needs to adapt early, but they are grinders. I expect them to be very good at S&D off the break. I'm going to put them in potential contenders, but man, this team is like the hardest read of all time. I really just don't know. Like, their floor is kind of lower than some of the other teams and potential contenders, and their ceiling might be about the same. So a really hard read, but I wouldn't be surprised if LAG get top 6 at the first event. It's a question of can they move from there and get up another tier. Next up, we got the LA Thieves, York COD champions from last season. They're running it back with the same squad. I don't think there's much else to say about this team, man. And considering the MW2 beta, which I think is off the break, seems to maybe promote a little bit more of an AR meta, but again, caution, you know, it's a beta. I like where this Thieves team is kind of built for potentially for this game. My biggest question for Thieves, and it was the same thing with FaZe last season after they were coming off that chip, and Dallas the year prior, it's like, you win a chip, can you maintain that same level of intensity? If we go with the rumored schedule where you literally have like 2 or 3 weeks of practice for the first couple of qualifiers in the beginning of December, if they come in and they're still sort of got the championship hangover, they're gonna fall behind. So I expect sort of Cap and Shane to set the right culture on this team. I don't know though if OpTic and FaZe in Minnesota maybe a little bit more competitive in the beginning of the season, if we're gonna see Thieves kind of be the #1 team off the break. I expect them to be top 4, but it's very competitive. So either way, I'm putting Thieves in Sunday regulars. Team's got what it takes. They they were playing very good at the end of last season. They're your champions. It would be super disrespectful to put them down a tier. And honestly, I think they are better right now than Minnesota and Toronto. And last up, we got the Seattle Surge. So they're running it back with the same squad and the same coaching staff. There were questions of potentially coaching changes going on there. The only miss is their GM is now heading off to a different spot, rumored to be joining LA Thieves actually as their general manager, with Mud Dog heading into a content role. Seattle coming off a really fun season last season. They won an event. They looked very good at the end of the season. Pred was doing some unspeakable things at COD Champs. Great contributions from Dante and Mac and Lamorke accuracy throughout the season. This team was a little inconsistent at times compared to some of the other teams that finished in top 4 this year, and has me a little bit concerned going into next season. They need to find a vein of consistency, especially a player in Mac who was like massively the X factor on the team last season. You're either fried or getting fried, so they need to kind of figure out a comfortability issue there. I'm kind of waffling where to put this team, honestly, because they really have the talent on a given day to beat all of the top 3 teams I see listed here. But they can also lose on a given day to teams like Minnesota and Toronto and LAG, again, with sort of how they played like throughout the year. So I'm going to put them in potential contenders. I want to put them in Sunday regulars, but I feel like, and this is maybe a hot take, I feel like Seattle might be the regression candidate of the year, considering a couple other teams got better. Pred, we got to see if he's re-signing potentially in a contract extension. He might have an opportunity to go and join a bigger organization in the offseason, considering he's on the last year of his deal. So all those questions abound. I think Seattle definitely has all the tools to be a top 4 team this season, but I got to put them in potential contenders because I have some questions about whether they can keep that intensity again to begin the year. So this is my team actually from the last video. Not that dissimilar. I think it looks like really my thought process was around Seattle, kind of pulling them down a tier, and obviously I add another tier, so it's split everything apart, but things kind of still fall into place, I think, for the most part. I think I still kind of feel like that Minnesota, LAG, Toronto trio kind of rounds out most of your spots in your top 8. I think that 8 spot is a question mark, but we'll see. Probably do one more other tier video before the season starts, especially once we get a sense of Paris's roster. So yeah, I think this is sort of where my thinking is now, but we still got a couple weeks before the season starts, so let's see what happens when we get to the 28th. As always, guys, let me know what you think in the video. Did you like it? Did you hate it? Do you agree with my tier list? Do you think I maybe should have put a team in a different spot? Let me know in the comments. As always, guys, like that video. If you love my content, subscribe. We'll keep pumping out more content for you in the coming weeks. And as always, we'll see you guys on the next one.